The Department of Justice issued demands to a Mississippi Police Department regarding them violating the constitutional rights of folks they have arrested. The DOJ found that the Lexington Police Department imprisoned people for outstanding fines without assessing whether they can afford to pay them. The DOJ said the practice must stop and the city must stop enforcing unlawful arrest warrants for people with outstanding fines. This announcement comes amid an ongoing Justice Department probe into alleged civil rights violations by police in Lexington, Mississippi. The investigation, which began in November, is focused on accusations of systemic police abuses in the majority black city of 1,800 people. I want to talk about this with my panel. Robert Patillo, he's the host of People, Passion, Politics, News and Talk 1380 WAOK out of Atlanta. Rebecca Carruthers, Vice President for Elections, Fair Election Center out of D.C. A. Scott Bolden, attorney here in D.C., former chair of the National Bar Association and D.C. Chamber of Commerce's Political Action Committee. Glad to have all three of you here. Scott, I want to start with you. We always talk elections matter. And I'm going to discuss this with Steve Benjamin later regarding Biden's State of the Union address. But we have a civil rights division in the DOJ that arguably is the most aggressive DOJ since Robert Kennedy was Attorney General. And again, the election of Biden-Harris is why we're having these types of investigations of police departments nationwide.
And then add the U.S. prison system or the penitentiary system to that list, and that Civil Rights Division under Kirsten, it gets even more aggressive and more successful. They're just going by police department and federal penitentiaries and state penitentiaries and state police departments one by one. There's so much work to be done in this space because it hasn't been done in the past that they're overwhelmed. But you're right, they are totally aggressive. And the reality is, why isn't the Biden administration, when you talk about shoring up your base during the election season, this is a talking point that we don't hear enough about, especially in the black community. This would be one of the lead issues for me as we talk about shoring up our base. I hope they start leading with this talking point because they've done incredible work in this space.
You know, Rebecca, this is an example of, frankly, going too far. And so, their whole deal was they want to create what has traditionally been the separation between DOJ and the White House. They want to say, hey, the decisions of the DOJ are legal decisions. They're not political decisions. But it's still Biden-Harris's DOJ. It's still their attorney general. And so they should be touting these things. We should be hearing these announcements coming from the podium from Karine Jean-Pierre or even John Kirby. We should be hearing these things on a regular basis because they are holding people accountable.
You know, the fact of being black in America is both political and it also has legal implications. So if the Biden-Harris administration wants to reach out to black people, they have to understand that by essence, our existence is political. So anytime you're doing things to protect black people, in this case, those in Lexington, Mississippi, it has political implications. It's okay. We don't have to run from politics. And quite frankly, not saying that the DOJ should be politically motivated in determining whether or not to enforce the Constitution. But the Biden-Harris administration needs to make it known, hey, there are constitutional violations that are happening across this country. And as an administration, we're going to make sure that those who are being violated have recourse through justice. That's the point of justice.
And the bottom line, Robert, for all Americans, whether you are African-American, Latino, Asian-American, Native American, white, you hope that there is a Department of Justice that will step in and examine issues if a local department, if a local DA, if the state doesn't do it. And so what's happening in Lexington, Mississippi is necessary, and thank God for an aggressive civil rights division that actually cares about American citizens, even if they have been arrested or if there are warrants or if they're imprisoned.
Well, I also want people to remember what the Justice Department was just one administration ago, because we can't look at this in a vacuum. Remember when Jeff Sessions was Attorney General, that was not too long ago. He spent the assets of the Civil Rights Division of the Justice Department to go after discrimination against white students in the form of diversity and affirmative action programs. That is what they spent the time and the efforts of civil rights attorneys in the Department of Justice to do, to investigate discrimination against white students. We have to look at what Bill Barr did as Attorney General and all the other acting attorneys general that President Trump had, whose main purpose were to help him steal the election and maintain power while going after his political adversaries. That is what a poor administration can do when they are given the immense power of the Justice Department. We're seeing the opposite of that now with Christian Clark and with Merrick Garland and the Biden Justice Department actually using these tools for the express purpose that they were meant to, which is to protect the civil rights of African Americans. And we should use this as a springboard to pass even stronger and more powerful legislation, giving them every tool they need so that when we have local jurisdictions that are unwilling to prosecute officers who violate the civil rights of individuals, give the Justice Department the tools they need to handle at the federal level. And that's how we'll start tamping down on police violence and police brutality nationwide.
And again, let me remind everybody who's watching, the Trump Department of Justice, they were clear. They were not going to investigate police departments. They said it was hurting the morale of police officers. They wanted to pull back on consent decrees. So for all the people out there who are watching and listening, who are confused about what to do in this election, do understand a Trump Department of Justice would not be investigating these type of issues. They would not be investigating what's happening in local jails, in state prisons, or what's happening in federal prisons. In fact, last week, we've been having some issues getting the video, but last week, the Department of Justice Civil Rights Division, Christian Clark, who leads it, they announced what was happening in Mississippi prisons. And they were talking about the horrible conditions that we're seeing there, and talking about what they're doing to fix those. And so, Mississippi, of course, is the blackest state in the union. This is the press release right here from the Department of Justice. So we got to understand, when they're talking about these investigations, they're talking about a lot of people who look like us. And so they found conditions in 3 Mississippi prisons violate the Constitution. It was a 60-page report, violates the 8th and the 14th Amendments, and it's the Central Mississippi Correctional Facility, the South Mississippi Correctional Institution, and the Wilkinson County Correctional Facilities house more than 7,000 people. And what they said here, Scott, was people living in prisons and jails have a constitutional right to safe and adequate living conditions. This is Acting Assistant Attorney General Benjamin Miser. Our investigation uncovered that people in these 3 facilities were subjected to violent and unsafe conditions in violation of the Constitution. And so, again, another perfect example of what happens when you have a federal Department of Justice holding states accountable for how they treat Americans.
Yeah, especially if you're gonna punish somebody, that doesn't equate to inhumane treatment. These are still human beings. And so they've certainly been convicted of a crime and they're going to prison. But our prisons, most of them are just cesspools of corruption and violence. I mean, whether it's violence or getting beat up or rape or what have you, it's almost like common culture on the outside that this is what happens when you go to prison. But Roland, on another note, when you talk about the White House and DOJ and the separation, here's an idea for the White House that they could take credit for, or not even take credit for, but get the word out at their press conferences or even in Biden's speech. I want to thank you. I want to thank DOJ. They're doing yeoman's work over there based on their press release. They did this and that with the prisons, the 3 prisons in Miami. They're cleaning up a police department. I want to compliment them on their stick-to-itiveness and their aggressive cleanup of our criminal justice system. That's all. Biden could say it. His press secretary could say that. And you're getting the word out and taking credit for it without violating some separation issue politically or perception-wise.
It is nonsensical to me, Rebecca, that we have talked more about the things the Civil Rights Division has done than any other media outlet in the country. every time we see one of these press releases, and we run video of the announcements as well, and not just this, but also the targeting of redlining and housing discrimination. And I sit here, and I've actually emailed people in the White House saying, hey, are any of y'all paying attention? I mean, I've literally said, y'all talk about every damn thing else. How in the hell are you not talking about this here? In fact, go back to my iPad. This report follows the April 22 report on Parchman, Mississippi State Penitentiary, known as Parchman, where it says, quote, violated the constitutional rights of persons incarcerated there by subjecting them to violence, failing to provide adequate care for serious mental health needs, or adequate suicide prevention measures, and using prolonged restrictive housing in a manner that poses a risk of serious harm. I don't understand why Biden's top advisors are not making sure that he is mentioning this, or the press secretary. It's literally the dumbest thing I've ever seen.
The American public expects the president to have involvement with the Department of Justice. Is one of his agencies where he actually sets the appointments, and the Senate confirms. Like, this is his Justice Department. Just like I would expect USDA, I would expect it to push Biden's ag policies. It's okay. In fact, when I think about some of the activists in Mississippi, like Rukia Lumumba, who really was out front on the Parchman situation, I think they would want to know that this president is active, this president is listening, is hearing, listening to the activism on the ground, and is now responsive, using the agencies that he directs, who runs those agencies. Like, it's interconnected. In fact, this president should want people to say, hey, you may not like me, you may not like all of my policies, but guess what? This is what all of the agencies are doing on your behalf. So if you vote for me for a second term, these are all of the things that you're going to be getting in the second term and more. He has to draw that distinction between what a full Biden-Harris administration looks like versus a Trump and whoever he picks as his number two administration. He needs to draw that comparison, and the only way for him to do it is listen to plies. Take credit for the good stuff that you're doing,
right? Because
otherwise no one's going to know that you're doing these things in your administration.
Go back to my iPad. Robert, look at this here. Former Alabama sheriff's deputy pleads guilty to federal civil rights offense for excessive force. That was on March 6th. Let me go down further. It says here, former Kentucky sheriff's deputy found guilty of federal civil rights charges following multiple assault and obstruction. That was March 5th, 2024. If I go to the next page right here, you see something about human trafficking. You see, let's go right here. Because that was, again, like I said, we talked about a lot of these things, but all of these are various things that the Department of Justice has been involved in. Most of the time, they're making these announcements from DOJ. It doesn't get lots of attention from the public, but people see this here, right? Justice Department informed City of Lexington, again, about the fines. We were just talking about that. If we go down here, right here, again, you see the Mississippi conditions right there that we just talked about. That was February 28th, that particular announcement. Former Alabama correctional sergeant sentenced for violating the civil rights of inmate by using excessive force and lying to cover it up. Then if you go down further, and again, folks, y'all out there, you can go to justice.gov and actually see these stories. And you're actually, these press releases showing you type of work. South Carolina man found guilty of hate crime for killing a transgender woman because of her gender identity. And look, we're just going to page 5 of the press releases right here. And you see how they're going after people for illegal tax returns. They're going after folks for any number of things. But again, there are a number of cases that we have talked about right here. Robert, Maryland correctional officer pleads guilty to conspiracy and destruction of records offenses related to cover-up of excessive force incident. I mean, your DOJ is doing the work. Folks voted for you to appoint an attorney general and the head of the Civil Rights Division to do these things, and you don't talk about it. That's nuts.
Democrats do a very poor job of controlling the narrative, often because they just aren't as dedicated to pushing the same message day in and day out. Think about what the current national conversation is on the issues of race. We're not talking about police officers who are being arrested and convicted and sentenced to jail time for violating the civil rights of African Americans and other minorities in this country through excessive force, as demonstrated by the Department of Justice. The conversation on race and racism in this country is about diversity, equity, and inclusion. It's about critical race theory. It's about what books are being banned and aren't being banned. Most of the stuff you just named, you can't even teach in Florida. That'd be against the law in that state. And so when you're talking about controlling the narrative, controlling the conversations around these things, we have to lead with this, and we have to also. And we're going to just say, and we're going to make the decision as a society and as a culture that entertainers will be leading the conversation on politics for the Black community. Let's make sure we're getting them the right facts and the right information. We people are going to be taking their political advice from Waka Flocka Flame and Sexy Red and Woe Vicky. Well, let's make sure that we're sitting them down with the Justice Department and the people who have been affected by many of these initiatives put forward by the Civil Rights Division, so that when they're going out there and repeating this information, they're repeating the correct information. Otherwise, we lose this argument to the intense MAGAs who are able to create their own version of reality to inhabit.